Thank you for tuning in to Leadership Level Up. I'm Brian Prairie.
And I'm Dr. Jeff Williamson.
I am just starting my leadership journey.
And I've been guiding leaders for 30 years.
Our podcast aims to shine a spotlight on outstanding leaders and provide a platform for them to describe their leadership journey and share the guiding principles that have helped them become great leaders. Today we are joined by President of Kankakee Community College, Dr. Michael Boyd, to discuss his leadership journey.
Welcome to the Leadership Level Up podcast. I'm Jeff Williamson here with my co-host Brian Prairie. And we're really pleased to have with us our friend Dr. Michael Boyd from Kankakee Community College, and excited about our conversation with him. Before we hear from him, let me give you just a little bit of his background. Dr. Boyd was named the president of Kankakee Community College in 2019, their 7th president. He is committed to community service, has been engaged with a number of efforts, United Way, vocational education, workforce board in our area, has served as a peer reviewer for Higher Learning Commission, chaired the Manteno Chamber of Commerce, and a variety of other leadership roles as well. He joined KCC staff in 2014 and was initially vice president for instructional and student success, which I think that's when we met, when you first came in that role. And served as the college's chief academic officer. Before he came to Kankakee Community College, he worked at Illinois Central College as Associate Dean of English, Humanities, and Language Studies. So I want to be careful and watch my my articulation and my words well, because I need to be on point for this. He served as ICC's Six Sigma Black Belt. I was teasing him that he may have others, but we'll get into that later. And then prior to that, he was a professor of English and Humanities, was the ICC Thomas K. Thomas Endowed Teaching Chair in 2007. And if we go back a little farther, he was a high school English teacher and football coach. He has 3 degrees from Illinois State University, a bachelor's in English education, master's degree in English studies, and a doctorate in English studies. So if I have English questions, you're my man.
Yes, I'll see what I can do.
Help me with my writing, for sure. Good to have you with us. Thanks for your time.
It's wonderful to be here, and thank you both.
Yeah.
And what a great location, too. So we're here at Stafari Cafe, so I appreciate the opportunity to speak with good friends and have a good conversation and have some really great coffee.
Yeah, that's one of the things we love about doing the shows in places where people gather, is that's kind of our jam. And love this place and glad to have a cup of coffee together as we talk.
And we want this to be as conversational as possible, and that's the kind of the point behind it, is to keep it loose, but talk about leadership. And I feel like that's where these kind of conversations happen, in your cafes, and just kind of around those places.
Yeah, I remember going back a few years now, you spoke at, I think it was a chamber event when it was recently after you had been elected president at Kankakee Community College, and you spoke to probably 200-300 people and said, I want to make an offer to you. If you want to get a cup of coffee and send me your information. And knowing you, I knew that was sincere. And it's taken us longer than I thought it would at that point, because I'm like, dude, I'm taking you up on that.
So
here we are.
You did.
So that was an early indicator of like, okay, this guy's a leader who knows how to connect with people when you can make that kind of offer and mean it from your heart, which I know you did.
Oh, totally. And one personal story from my point of view is, I knew Dr. Boyd, and also I always wanted to call him Dr. Boyd, but working with him, he's like, just call me Mike. And it's like, so when Mike was, first, I was first kind of opening my business. I knew he was a leader, but I mean, looking at him and how he talks, like, he's an imposing kind of guy. I was a little afraid of him, to be honest with you. Like and just because, but then once I got to know you, like, you were so articulate, but also just so welcoming with any conversation. And I just wanted to thank you for that, because like I said, I was, I was, starting a new business, and then, talking to some of these, people in more leadership positions, and I just didn't feel comfortable in that space right then. And you helped me feel comfortable in that space.
That makes me feel good. Thank you for saying that.
And I think that's really a gift for those leaders who possess that in whatever their role is, however advanced their education or their position is, that they're able to create that level of comfort with it, that people go, look, I've done some things, but I'm just a guy. Let's talk. Let's be friends.
It's important for me to hear this feedback too, because I make a very intentional effort to do that, and it's important, I think, especially in higher education, for us to do that. Community colleges appeal to and are accessible to first-generation students. Like me, I was a first-generation student, and the prospect of going, from my home, where college wasn't, there was no college knowledge at work in my home environment, onto a college campus was very intimidating. And to have people walk up to me and say, "Welcome, you belong here," was very important. And so, I think our college campus can be very intimidating for many first-generation students, and I try to exhibit that and role model that behavior. We need to be welcoming to the students who come to our campus and make them feel like they belong.
Yeah.
And I think the more intentional efforts we do in that to do that makes us more effective. And I think leadership is the same way.
Yeah, and I think as staff and faculty see you as the organization's CEO being welcoming and intentional to be friendly and reach out to students and families that kind of have that "I'm not sure where I'm going" look on their face, right? Can I help you find something? Good morning.
Yeah.
And then you walk on and they're like, "Who was that?" And I think, "Oh, I didn't expect the president to be so warm and welcoming and help us find career office or whatever it is." And so it's disarming in a good way when people think, "Oh, maybe it's okay for my spouse, my son, my daughter to come to school here. There's going to be people that care and help them on this journey that's so new for first generation college students."
Yeah, agreed. I think that's so wonderful that you just kind of, it's so, just easy for you, because I see you at events and everyone approaches you and you have it's always this just warm greeting. But like I said, you're a little imposing at first, but like once you get to know, like, oh, he's just a big teddy bear. Like, he wants to help everybody.
Do we need to edit that out?
I trust you all.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know when someone has been in leadership as long as you have and is leading many other people at your campus and places you've served before, that usually a part of the story is that you've had leaders and mentors who invested in you, poured into you, showed you what caring, kind, gracious leadership can look like. Who might some of those kinds of people be, and what was that impact?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one I've always struggled to answer. And just at the risk of maybe sounding irreverent, I don't want to give you that list.
Sure.
It's tough for me to identify specific people who I would identify as mentors.
It could be characteristics or ways that they mentored you.
And that relationship of mentor to protege, I believe, is one that should be very intentional, and it's one that's formal. So in whatever context or structure that looks like, I think the true mentor-protege relationship is one that is arranged, one that is perhaps negotiated even, or established. And then there's commitments that are ongoing, and time commitments and
both sides, right?
On both sides, absolutely. And I've got to be honest with you, I've never had that kind of relationship. Now, I have been mentored by people, and certainly I could name a number of supervisors and leaders along the way who've exhibited qualities that I've looked at and I said, I want to take that. I want to steal that behavior from you and incorporate it into what I do. Almost invariably, though, each one of those folks who I would name also exhibited some things that I thought were detractors.
Sure.
They were negative behaviors.
Maybe not that one.
And equally so. I mean, that's an opportunity for me to go, but I'll never do it that way. Or I think I would be more effective doing it another way. And so, I can't look to and I can't look to a specific list of names and say that person or these people were my mentors. But I can say that I pulled important things from that helped me along the way. And look, maybe this is part of just, I'm a Gen Xer, and I think as Gen Xers, we, because of pop culture, because of societal context, because of workplace culture, in a lot of ways, Gen Xers have been neglected in the workforce. And so I can't remember a time when a supervisor, a leadership group sat me down and said, "We see great potential in you. We want to give you this relationship with a mentor who will help you do these things." It just never happened. And so I feel in a lot of ways, and I think many Gen Xers in the workplace now feel the same way, we've had to be very independent as we've sought out our professional development kind of on our own.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of research out there about Gen Xers. Perhaps not surprisingly, it's being ignored, as so much of the focus now is on millennials leaving the workforce. I'm sorry, baby boomers leaving the workforce and millennials coming in. But I tell people too that it's not that I didn't have important people that have influenced me. I wouldn't call them mentors, and I think the most impactful relationships on my professional development have come from close friends. Folks in my workplace that kind of push that border between colleague and personal friend.
Yeah.
And when you can have that relationship of trust and somebody across the table who will look at you and say, I need to give you some really hard truths.
Right.
And you look at that person and you say, I trust you to give me those hard truths. And I'm going to look at that. That's more impactful than a mentor.
True. Yeah.
And I benefited from that.
Oh, totally.
A specific person I'm thinking about, he and I had not a standing lunch date. We would do it ad hoc, but we had kind of this code. And when he'd get out of line, he'd say, I need to buy you some tacos. And that was code for we need to go to lunch, and I'm going to give you a hard truth. And I would always listen, and likewise, he would do the same. And that's been more impactful for me than a standard, typical mentor-protege relationship.
Well, it's informal.
Being a Gen Xer as well, I guess I definitely, since you kind of shine a light on it, totally. I definitely feel, and I also felt that I maybe wasn't worthy of some of that, like, because I would see other leaders and other people like, and because I've had bosses, and once I took on more of a leadership role of like, I don't want to be a boss, bosses, I don't want to, that's not me, and so. And that's really kind of how I grew my relationship even more with Jeff. Is like, I don't want to be a boss, but I don't really know how to be a leader. So how do Because I want to be their friend, but I also want to be somebody that is moving them forward in a meaningful and efficient way. Because there's a business to run, So talking to Jeff really kind of helped me validate some of the things I wanted to put out there, knowing that kind of now reflecting on that, oh man, I never had anybody dissuading me from being a leader, but I never really had anybody say, hey, you have some traits that I think would be great, and also I take that to heart as well as I never want somebody under my tutelage or leadership to never not feel that. I'm always going over. I go, how can I help you in any way? What do you need? Because I just want them to feel like this is a safe place, and you can ask. If you need something, let me know, so we can make sure that you're the best you that you can be.
Right.
Because that helps me, and then it also helps you too.
Yeah, and in those conversations, we talked about strengths. Anytime I have more than 5 minutes with someone, I'm talking about strengths and identifying those and shining a light on those. And I think some of our conversations about those specific strengths that he had were times where he was like, oh, I never thought about it like that.
They were aha moments for sure. I didn't. Once he it shone a light on him, I'm like, oh, that makes so much more sense. Ideation. Ideation is one of mine, and he's like, that means you have to somebody tells you something, you got to process it, you got to think about it. I'm like, I just thought it was slower than everybody else. No, I'm processing it in a different way.
You think deeper than most of us, and that's why it's okay for you to say, can I get back to you in a couple hours? I need to think about that.
Which means the quality of that.
Exactly. What you get is so much better.
That's right.
Right, and so in him helping me kind of one, realize those strengths, and now I can play to those strengths. That it's it's a game changer, and also then I can also see those strengths in other people as well. So I was like, oh man, this is so great. And so that kind of the genesis of the podcast here is just final thing. He asked me, he goes, how are you going to keep being? What are you going to keep? How are you going to keep moving towards your leadership goals? And I go, well, I want to talk to more leaders. And then as I thought about it for a day, and I was like, what if we do this together and make a podcast? And he's like, that sounds like a great idea. I love talking to people.
Good eye.
Great. So Yeah, just made sense.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, in that vein, too, continue to think about strengths and characteristics that have helped with successes.
Sure.
You've had some. I'd love to hear more about those because, as you mentioned a second ago, we have those friends that we give permission to kind of kick us in the pants, if I could say it that way.
Yeah, right.
But then there are also those times where they're going, you know what? You were just fantastic in that moment or in that conflictual situation. I love that about you. And I find myself a lot of times trying to call out those things, not just see them and go, oh, that's really nice. That's really good. But to say, man, in that moment, you were fantastic in this way. What is some feedback over time? This is your permission to be not to be humble, to say, you know, I think a couple of things that help me be successful would be these strengths. What might be some of those?
Yeah, so you're asking about particular strengths.
Sure.
Yeah. So a couple of different constructs come to mind, and that's the Strengths Finder. I think that's what you're alluding to as well. I think I've got a fairly unique array of strengths there, but it's funny.
We do a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
That'll be the follow-up. Yeah.
Very good. But yeah, I think like most people, when you see your results from Strengths Finder, it's jaw-dropping moment. You think, oh my gosh, how did they nail me? You know, and you know, focus is certainly in high in there. Achiever is as well, as is competition, and then learning and input. So all of those things just kind of hit me, and I went, oh yeah. I did the Strengths Finder actually after I did and analyzed the results of the DISC analysis. And the DISC analysis is another one that I think hits you pretty hard.
Connection there. Yeah.
And there I rank high on that influencing construct.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and you know, I appreciated the things that you both said about your interactions with me early on and being gracious and open and approaching. You'd mentioned intimidating. I think my strengths on the Strengths Finder as well as the DISC illuminate, you know, sort of these natural instincts I had to be that kind of leader who's the influencer type, who's highly worried about achievement and competition. And honestly, I've worked against that in a lot of ways because, Brian, I think it can come across as intimidating.
Yeah.
And comforting as well. So by that I mean in moments of crisis, when you're at those very difficult moments as an organization, I think a lot of people look to leaders who exhibit those more traditional leadership qualities, what you might consider prototypical. And I've never been hesitant to step into those most difficult moments, make some very tough decisions quickly when it's needed. And I think organizations can become comforted too much with that kind of leadership. So even in small group dynamics, if there's somebody who steps in and takes over, the rest of the team can step back and go, hey, it's going to get done, so let's let it go. What we lack sometimes is the kind of introspection, ideation that can come from longer term pontification and exploration. And so I've done two things. I kind of not to play to my strength, but to make sure that my strengths don't become dysfunctional as a leader, and that is to make sure that I'm intentionally not being intimidating. And to resist the impulse to achieve and to compete by getting quickly to the results and outcomes. Now, don't get me wrong. I think a good leader knows when we have to make a quick decision and move. But a good leader also knows when to say, let's take a step back. And as much as I want to achieve and focus and get this project done today, maybe we get better quality results if we can take a step back. And so I've had to rein in my own strengths, which is to achieve and to compete now, and do that very intentionally.
Do you feel that that is I feel like with a lot of who we've been talking to is that reflection, self-reflection is a lot of part of leadership. Like, and you have to kind of like turn in on yourself sometimes. Like, is this the best way that I can, help the situation?
Self-reflection is a good word for it. The word I like to use is metacognition. So if you know how your mind works, if you've done the self-reflection to know and to call out your own behaviors, I think you can be more conscious and deliberate in terms of how you exhibit those behaviors.
For sure. Yeah. When you talk about strengths, I often say that our strengths can be a double-edged sword. Because we can stay on the accelerator too much with those, particularly competition and achiever. Achiever is the most frequent of the 34 strengths in the U.S. Among 30 million people globally who've taken that in the U.S., achiever is the most frequent one to show up. So it's common.
There
And
may
it
be a
can
physician's bias there, right? I mean, who's
Yeah.
taking strengths finders, right? People who are high achievers.
That's true.
30 million. But yeah, it can be a double-edged sword where sometimes we do need to pump the brakes a little
Yeah.
bit. And the other thing that you mentioned about achiever, and I loved it when somebody helped me with this realization, was that when others hear we have achiever, they can assume that we're just here to defeat them. But another way you can look at that is because I'm high in achiever, that's because I want us to win.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? And to me, that's the good side of that blade of two.
Yeah.
Is like, yes, I'm high in achiever, but for me, it's a we thing. I want us to achieve, or you're leading your organization. You want them to achieve and win, but it's not at the cost of crushing everybody else. It's just like we're so much. If we grow and we're so much better, then we're going to win.
Yeah.
In the sense of that.
Yeah, and to push that conversation a little bit further, I appreciate you using the pronoun we, because I think the best leaders are the ones who understand their own strengths. They have that metacognition, but they're less worried about their own strengths than they are in building a team with diverse strengths.
Absolutely.
And so if you're not practicing that metacognition and recognizing your own assumptions and how you're distributing them, utilizing those, you may end up building a team that works exactly like you do.
Right.
And that's no good.
No,
You need to build a leadership team or your cabinet level team around you that pulls in all of those strengths. And the best leaders will attend to that and find people that can augment what they bring to the table.
That's so great to hear you say that, because in talking to my team, I'm always like, well, here's how we do it, efficiently.
Yeah.
But also, I want to be able to hand these projects off to various numbers of people. But also, I go, you need to bring you to this as well.
Yeah,
I don't want them to just be like, I don't want another Brian. I go like, I don't know another Brian. One's enough. Like that, we don't need any more.
Fair.
But I go, especially in a creative field, like I go, your creativity is who you are, and I want to stress, just because I do something one way doesn't mean it's that's the end. Like no. Like I want you, if there's a way you can do it better and have the same result and maybe even a better result, that's great. Like that's all. That to me, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And then diversity in the people around you, like I love that thought process is and it's so true. Because I tell everybody actually, like, I don't want to be the best at everything. I know the things I'm good at, and that's all I want. That's it. And then everybody else can kind of fill in.
And that's the hardest strengths. We elevate those things that are the best things about us, the strongest gifts we have, and make those better. Yeah. And Dr. Don Clifton, who created the Strengths Finder now over 20 years ago, he used to say we focus so much on individuals being well-rounded, but his position was well-rounded individuals. We don't have to have well-rounded individuals. He said our teams need to be well-rounded, which goes back to your point of saying, I don't have to be all things to all people. I don't need 5 other Michael Boyds on my inner circle leadership team. We need that variety, that spice, that difference to say, help me think about that from a different lens or a different filter. And that's where I think we end up with better decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I always like to dive into, because we're talking about a lot of positive things, and I don't want to talk about anything negative, but also I want to jump into like, because I feel like failure is a word that everybody can kind of feel like that's a negative connotation. But in some of my work with Jeff and some of the reading I've been doing, failure is an opportunity to do better. And I just wanted to know if there's anything that you look back in your life and it's like, let's not call it failure, but an opportunity to like, oh, this really changed me. Like this is something that like, oh man, I'm gonna do better because of this.
Yeah, it's hard for me to think about things in terms of failure.
Right.
And I think that's what you're getting to. And
because they don't want to call it a failure.
Yeah,
It's not so final. It's just like, that didn't go the way I wanted it to. However.
Yeah. Well, and I think you can define failure as you didn't get to the outcomes you intended. But I can't point to a time where those outcomes were more negative than where we started.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So it's hard for me to identify the failures as not getting the outcomes. Look, if you're the kind of leader who says at the start of a project or initiative, here's what I intended to achieve, then you're neglecting the importance of shared governance and building input and getting other people's opinions. And if you're judging success or failure by alignment of the results to your intended outcomes, then I think you've failed to be as flexible as you can. So generally speaking, I think in most projects or initiatives I've led or played a leadership role. We never get to the outcomes that we thought we were going to get to, but the outcomes were always good.
Yes.
Maybe not as great as we intended them to be, but they were an incremental improvement. And so it's hard for me to look back and say, where did I fail?
Right.
There's
I guess I
certainly...
wasn't really getting at that.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
want to like point out a failure.
Sure. Yeah.
Because that's something like
Yeah.
I think failure is a stupid word because it's something that one we
Yeah.
get hung up on.
Right.
But also, like you said, at the beginning, like, well, I guess if you're saying like, if I didn't do A and then
Yeah.
get to B, okay, I failed. Like, well, no, but you still got the B.
Sure.
Like, maybe it was a little bit zigzaggy,
Right.
but you still got there. And I think that's something we need to focus more on. Is like,
Right.
is
What
to
did we
be able.
learn?
What did we learn? Were we able to shift in a way that was conducive to the project or whatever the outcome wanted to be?
Yeah.
I think that's the more important thing to kind of focus on is like, I didn't want to like
Yeah,
I
no,
didn't want
I
to
get
like
it.
put
I
a
get it.
put a microscope on failure, but I just
Yeah.
want to like figure out like a way to and I think that's a common leadership trait as well is taking those maybe not the results that didn't go the way you wanted to, and then using those and then either learning something or changing direction. You're like, well, that didn't really work out, but let's
Yeah,
let's
let's
not
figure
just
out,
like,
yeah.
well, throw everything away
Yeah.
and start over again. Like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Course
you know,
correct.
Yeah, I think one of the things, is, as you frame it in that context, if you take a look at career trajectory, and it's fun to talk with, not fun, it's important, I think, to talk with younger emerging leaders about what that looks like. And I appreciate every opportunity I get to share with emerging, developing leaders some of the jobs I didn't get. Because I think in our minds, when we look at someone who has, it was currently a CEO or in an executive level position, you just assume that they had a straight line and they won every job, they won every candidacy along the way. And so I love to tell people, when I applied for a vice presidency of student affairs, and I didn't get the job. Of course, at the time, I thought I was the best candidate. When I didn't get the job, I realized I wasn't.
Right.
And then you have two options. You can be really mad about it. You can call it failure and be defeatist and say, well, I guess I've hit the end of my career trajectory. This is where it stops. Or you can be mad at it and say, well, the hiring manager's wrong. Or you can stop and you can say, what was not in my candidacy that would have given me that opportunity or made me successful in that? And that's the approach I've always taken. I've never gone to the hiring manager and said, what could I do better? I think that's an unfair thing to say, but I have reached out to that circle of trusted friends and I say, I didn't get the job I wanted.
Right.
What do you think? And generally they're
Where do I
willing to
need to
say,
grow?
Yeah.
generally they're willing to ask those questions like, well, did you have experience in this? Well, no, but I would.
I'm sure I could have done it.
Yeah, I could have done it.
Yeah.
So, I guess I love to talk, not from, my leadership role at a college, because I think it's important for leaders to say, this is not failure. This is incremental improvement, and we're gonna take a different tack. We're gonna keep pursuing quality. But from a personal perspective, personal growth, it's fun to talk about those.
Yeah.
Certainly not fun if you
Right.
just didn't get the job you wanted.
Right.
But it's fun to help leaders understand,
Right.
hey, there are times when I didn't get the job either,
Right.
and I still did okay. So
Yeah.
there's still the next step for you.
You say fun, I think important. I think it's just like, rather than, because that failure could be something negative that you try to internalize.
That's right,
And then
yeah.
rather than internalizing, you talk about it, you're like, well, hey,
Yeah.
so-and-so, how could I have done this better? Or what do you, here's the conversation, like, oh, well, and they're an outsider looking in and can give you a pretty nice, assessment of like, oh, I never even thought of that. That's actually a great insight. Thank you. And having those trusted friends, and Jeff likes to say, your personal board of directors. Personal board of directors.
that's
I'm like,
good.
oh, I
That's
love
really
that.
good.
I'm like, and I've been kind of.
That's what you described earlier.
Yeah,
That's right, yeah.
I've been signaling those people out. It's like, oh, this person, this is this person, and it's been really helpful to know that. And there's been people in my life that like that, but I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's who that person is, and it's been really great.
Yeah, it's neat to put those people that are close to us in those contexts to say, I give them permission to say hard things to me. A little bit of a shift because I know
Yeah.
both of us have young adult children, and And so when we talk about leadership, on a personal basis,
Yeah.
there's you and your wife Maureen. You have 4 children. I'm married and have 3 young adult children, and so I think sometimes I've learned as much or more in our house from opportunities to grow as anywhere else. So I'd love to hear some of your reflections even on like the dad investing in,
that's great.
in
That's
young adults that we have now.
Yeah, there's so many parallels, but there's so many dissimilarities as well. It's funny. Sometimes it's a difficult transition going from work to home because at where I work, I'm the CEO, so everybody hangs on my every word and expects decisions to be. When I get home, I'm just dad, and I don't know a darn thing. I'll tell you what. And so so it's kind of humbling, and it kind of puts you back in it humbles you greatly when you walk back into your home after a day of work and you realize, hey, I'm just
a guy here.
The other thing too, and this just echoes the conversation that we just had, intended outcomes, and I think when your children start to make their own decisions, not decisions about where they're going to eat or which park they're going to ride their bicycles to, but make decisions about their life that will have long-term impact. You suddenly realize that they're independent thinking people who are making decisions that maybe I wouldn't have made for them. And you have that moment, I think, as a parent when you have to not let them go, but let it go, that they have to they have to live a life that's their own.
Right.
And you can be a part of that,
Right.
or you can resist it, or you can be mad about it. And I think if you be a part of it, you can help everyone grow and be happier. And isn't that the same true for most effective leaders in an organization? I think you got to be a part of it, let it grow, get everyone's input, and realize that even if you didn't achieve your intended outcomes at the onset, you're probably still better off as an organization if everybody's moving forward.
I love that parallel there too that I have seen both as an organizational leader and as a dad to say, where do you want your life to be in 5 years, or what do you see your life looking to a son or a daughter, rather than saying, okay, this is my job, you're going to do my job for the rest of your life because I think it's a good job for you.
Yeah.
That's not a conversation we've ever had at my house.
Yeah, right.
And I'm guessing that they're different than that at your house too. So that I do see that parallel where as leaders, it goes back to that we question that you mentioned earlier, to say, as an organization, where do we want Kankakee Community College to be? Rather than you come in and say, this, and this is where we're going to get to, this is where we're going to do it, go. That's a different response than saying, let's dream together about what we could look like.
Yeah.
And I think it's true in families sometimes. As you reference, when they're younger, it's like, no, you're not going there.
Yeah.
Or no, you can't go there. But then later on, I found myself in those late high school years saying, I'll tell you what I think, but it's your life.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that goes back to what you were referring to, that kind of that letting go of the decision process to say, I thought you should have gone in this career, but you're passionate about this, and I support that because I want you to do what you feel like is your life calling and direction.
And as Brian mentioned before, he asked the question, what can I do to help?
Yeah. Exactly.
The minute you say, I would do it this way, close right up.
Yeah, right.
That's really been one of the 20-something years for all my children being in their 20s is for my phone to ring or I get a text and say, hey, Dad, you got a minute? I want to ask you something. I'm like, yes. Because it's like, oh, my stock is rising because they're like, hey, how does this insurance thing work? Or is that something you can actually ask a person at work? That seemed weird. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not okay. And so we get to be mentors informally, even as dads. So
it's very rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to make sure we looped that in the conversation because I've often said I'm a better person because I have kids.
Absolutely.
And then they call family meetings now. When they were younger, if things weren't going on, it's like, okay, we're having a family meeting. We need to get this cleared up. In the last couple of years, I've had different ones of my kids say, we need to have that's Zoom now, but we need to have a family meeting. There's some things we need to talk about that aren't okay.
There you go.
Who told you could do that? But I guess I created
that culture.
That space where they could say, this isn't okay. I want things to go differently. And we go, Well, all right then, talk to me. I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Which I think is a part of good leadership.
Absolutely.
It caught my eye. As leaders, we're constantly in front of people and doing our thing, but is there any time where you feel stuck and like what do you do? I know I like to go for a hike or go for a walk or just kind of clear my head to kind of get a problem.
Yeah.
Because I'm a thinker, I'm an ideation, I want to think about it. So, is there what do you do as a leader to kind of like if you're feeling like kind of like stuck in a whether it's a problem or just looking at it because sometimes as leaders like the problems are so big you're just like oh my gosh like so what's your process?
Yeah, no, I appreciate all kinds of times to get away from the office, and that's where I kind of have the biggest epiphanies.
Same.
So making sure that you're spending some time out of the office and making sure that you're spending some time away from the routine aspects of your job as well.
Always even.
I've never figured out a solution by processing emails, right? You get the problems in the emails, and so you got to remember that sometimes it's important to close the laptop and to walk away, and then make sure that you have. That metaphor of work-life balance, I think, is challenging. So I'm happy to challenge it if we get time in the conversation today. So I don't want to present it as that, but making sure that you do have time away from the routine aspects of your role, and that's where I've found. So I weightlift a little bit. That's sometimes when I get a good thought. Yeah.
Activity.
Right.
Yeah. I've got a little spot in my garage. It was kind of, I won't call it a workshop, but I try to make it look like that. And it looks so different from my work environment in my office, if that makes sense. And so I feel enough distance from that to be able to use that as a moment of contemplation.
Sometimes we need that contrast, right?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And that's where especially because it's a workshop, and my family background is very simple. I grew up on a farm, and sometimes common sense and just work ethic are the things that solve problems.
Right.
And when you're in your office in that space, I think as a leader sometimes you let things become too complicated. And so in my garage, in that workshop, you just realize, hey, sometimes this is common sense, and the best answer is just to think about the common sense approach. And it's those kind of moments that spark an idea that I can bring back to the office and flesh out. I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, it does. Yeah. I've been tell everybody I've been teaching myself how to play guitar for like 4 years, but it's more of it's not to learn to play the instrument. It's more to just kind of disconnect my mind and just like focus on one thing. And I found that music, and since it's very focus oriented, that I have to. If I'm not focused, if I'm focusing on something else, I'm messing up all the time. Stuff like that. So for me it was guitar, just like to disconnect. And then you're right, like all of a sudden, like after I'm done playing, I'm like, oh, I came up with a great idea for this and this, and like all of a sudden just the gates open. And it's kind of great. And I think, like you said, having something that is it doesn't have to be very, very different. Just something out of the consistency of what your day is.
Yeah, it has to break your routine.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess the final thing is there any books or podcasts or something that
I'm
you
ready.
that you would recommend to leaders or that you get something out of?
No, I intentionally don't do that. I have a hard time reading a lot of the standard leadership texts. I think if you go and browse, the leadership, they're fun to read. Don't get me wrong, and there's always something you could take away from them. In my experience, that has always been very much a reminder, and I think the act of just getting away from your routine and reading a book is more important than the text.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so I really struggle. People say, what's your
reading?
What are you reading? I struggle with that because I haven't found great value in some of this. It reminds me too much of self-help kind of things, and so I struggle there. English is my background, and so I don't want it to sound too elitist, but I think some of that literature is very helpful as well.
Okay.
From a leadership perspective too, and I've spoken on how much Marcus Aurelius' meditations have impacted me, and not only because when you've got leader of the Roman Empire, right? I'm dealing with challenges, and then it's literally his diary. So you kind of this very vulnerable set of texts from somebody who's in a very complex leadership role. That's cool in and of itself. And then the other neat thing about those meditations is that they're written in very short bursts. So it's not, sometimes when we need that moment of inspiration, we don't have time to take 45 minutes and really dive into a chapter. And so, Marcus Aurelius' meditations are those that you can kind of pick up in those coffee break moments and get a contemplative moment. And you're reminded that he's in a very complex leadership role, and you have very vulnerable access to him. And so here's a leader who experienced self-doubt, who wrestled with challenges.
He'll let you look into his soul.
It's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So,
That's good.
I say that's been on my to read list for a while.
Yeah.
Well,
Brian, it's
now
one of
it's
those,
online, so
and
thank
it's
you.
one of those things that you don't. I would resist the impulse to think you have to pick it up and read it over the next week. Just literally
Chip away at it
have a
almost.
copy, because
Cool.
they're written as these not disconnected but discrete short meditations, and so you can read them very much in the same way that you might do a daily Bible study, for example,
Devotional
or
type
a devotional
focus,
type,
piece by piece. I like
Cool.
it. Very cool.
Yeah, because in reading some of those books, I like to read, but I have to kind of switch it up. Like, so it'll be a leadership thing, and then all of a sudden it'll be like something completely fiction. So Lord of the Rings or space or whatever. That's my
Switch it
jam. Switch it up. But I like to call that digestible. Like you can just kind of pick it up, and it's like, okay, cool. I got my fill, and then you can pick it up again. Cool. I'm definitely going to add that to my. I think it already is actually on my to read list. So.
Yeah. And look, I'm not trashing a whole leadership
no,
literature industry. There's value there.
It's just you have to pick and choose some.
You do.
You know
Yeah.
what you need from
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
Well, thanks so
Cool.
much for being with us.
Yeah, it's been
Brian
delightful.
Boyd.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure, and enjoyed talking with you. I think we could do this another hour, but I know our schedules don't allow that right now. So we'll do this another time.
Well, it's been great fun, and it's always fun. And Jeff, you and I have used this term a lot of times. It's always fun to talk with friends, and,
Yes,
and I know
absolutely.
every time I reference you, I say my friend Jeff,
Yeah,
and I think
likewise.
you said my friend Mike, and Brian were friends as well.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's always good to talk with friends and have a cup of coffee, and I'll never miss that opportunity.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Next week, we'll be joined by the Executive Director for the Community Foundation of the Kankakee River Valley, Nicole Smokovich.